I'm not sure whether it's a couple of years ago, I was reading in the paper some old history of the Empress. A guy who had bought it over 20 years ago and who had started to dig it out manually, trying to, reach his vision of where it is today. I think it was great that the Empress and this man's idea and his dream was able to come about to where we now have this place we can go and watch the plays and have a time with family and to laugh and enjoy and to get out and enjoy the community out here.
I was originally involved in the Empress several years ago, I believe, in one of our productions called The Mystery of Edwin Drood. And a close friend of mine by the name of John Williams, who was directing the show at the time, called and asked me if I wouldn't come down and participate and be one of the actors on the stage. And from the very moment I walked into this theater, I fell in love. How could you not?
The Empress itself is the only building on Magna Main Street that's part of on the National Register for Historic Buildings. Such a great building, built back in 1916. It was built originally as a burlesque hall for all the miners here in the town. And that was, again, in 1916. But then a year later, it turned over and changed to silent movies. And it ran as a movie theater up through the mid-50s.
I do remember that there was the two show houses in Magna. There was the Gem Theater and the Empress. And the Empress had stage shows. And but I just remember going there the one time, and I must have been about 12 years old.
There was a gentleman by the name of Steve Baker who thought he could do he started doing some of the renovation work, but I don't know, that was in the 70s, and I don't know what stopped him. But in the 80s, we had Leo Ware.
Originally from El Paso, Texas, Leo William Ware was born on January 2nd, 1923. He later moved to Salt Lake City, Utah. He married his wife, Eileen, in 1958. Leo had been a World War II veteran, serving in the U.S. Army Air Corps. He was also a draftsman, an airplane mechanic, and a builder. And he also had a love for the theater.
Leo was the kind of guy that liked to do things by himself. And even though he was an older man, in his 60s and 70s and eventually 80s when he was working here, he didn't want a lot of help. In fact, he was pretty much a lone man doing this work. When he came in through the doors, there was, of course, this theater area, but there wasn't a dressing room downstairs. I mean, there was nothing downstairs except for there was a coal chute for the furnace. And Leo had this great vision and decided to dig out this basement, or a basement, by hand with a shovel and a wheelbarrow.
After buying the Empress Theater in 1983, Leo immediately began renovation. But problems were already around the corner. In 1984, the Salt Lake County began tearing down the old and abandoned buildings that were along Main Street in Magna. The old fire station that had been right next door to the theater had already been torn down, and in July, the Empress Theater itself was declared unsafe and scheduled for demolition. Leo tried to urge the commissioners to reverse their own decision to demolish the building, but in the end, all he got was a few extra months to fix the structural flaws in the building. Leo worked hundreds of hours, and finally in December, when all the flaws were fixed and the building was safe again, the building was no longer condemned. Leo continued work for 20 years, working single-handedly to renovate the building. Leo repaired the roofs and replaced the floors. He tore down the walls and put up new ones. Before 20 years were done, Leo had invested over $30,000 into the theater. This wasn't a job for him. This was a dream. But that dream would be interrupted by a car accident. The injury suffered from that accident prevented Leo from continuing his work on the theater. And a few months later, he developed Alzheimer's.
Leo had done something really unique and special here. All we had here were the risers, but we didn't have any seats. There was no carpet, nothing like that. Nothing was painted, nothing was finished. But through his efforts, we were able to get these seats, get things completed so we could open the doors on November 4th of 2006.
The show was in production before we completed the building, and we were sweating bullets. On that week before the show opened, that's where the angels came forward. People who didn't even know why they were showing up, showed up and said, there's something going on here, and I just felt like maybe I could make a contribution. Well, they were right. They were needed, and they were people who had skills. They were showing up and finishing the work.
When we were in here and we were cleaning and you know, because Leo had a lot of stuff around and building materials, that type of thing, so we had to do a lot of dejunking, you know, and decide what was worth keeping, what wasn't. One thing that we found that we were thrilled with was a roll of tickets from the Empress Theater back in the 50s. Tickets were 20 cents for adults and 14 cents for kids. I mean, we just felt like we had found this little gold mine, you know, oh my gosh, look at this. So, and it was just told a volume of, about this place.
We worked day and night for the last few days, and we got our occupancy permit about an hour before our show was to open.
We had hundreds of volunteers here working to get it to that point so we could get an occupancy permit. Amazing. But our first show, Forever Plaid, was awesome, fabulous. And 1 week later, Leo and his family came to see the show. Now keep in mind, Leo was in his wheelchair, you know, had Alzheimer's, and honestly was a very, very frail man, so he was kind of bent over in his wheelchair. But his family sat over here on this side of the theater and had him right out in the front row. And we wondered if he'd even have a clue where he was, even if he was at a show. But about halfway through this show, the actors on the stage would start shaking hands in the audience, to the audience there, you know, with the audience. And Leo looked up and put his hand out so that his hand could be shaked. And then at the end of the show, he applauded. His family, there were 17 of them here that night, cried like babies because he had worked so, so hard and never got to open the doors. Yet he was here when we opened the doors and got to see that first show. And just days later, he passed away.
This whole thing started for me about a little over 3 years ago, when my wife and I were driving up and down Main Street and just looking at all the old buildings and admiring the quaintness, the nostalgia of the little town that we live in.
We rarely came to Magna Main Street for anything. Even though we live in Magna, we just didn't have any reason to come down here. But sometimes on a Sunday afternoon, it was fun to go for a drive and see Magna Main Street. And you know, every time though, we would go up and down the street, we would say, you know, somebody really should do something with Magna Main.
We stopped in front of the Empress Theater and we said, you know, this is the neatest old building. Somebody really ought to do something with it. And we were standing right there in front of a phone number on a for sale sign, and we decided to call it. So We arranged with Kim Ware, who is the manager of the Ware estate, who owns the building, to come and give us a tour.
Leo's family, the Ware family, they're wonderful people. Aline is his wife. She volunteers and works over at Hale Center Theater. So she's very dedicated to the theater community. His son Kim is the one we actually work with in the family, who has been just fabulous to us.
We were on fire after walking through this building. We had no idea what it was like inside, how much work had been done by his father to turn this into a theater.
There wasn't a light in this place. There wasn't a seat in this place. We had no sound system. We had no microphones. So we literally had to start this all from scratch. So, and nothing had been painted, finished in any way. So we had to really rely on the volunteers in the community. This community of Magna and the surrounding area is really underserved when it comes to performing arts. So they were all hungry to have something out here. Knowing full well that the paycheck was this much, they came out in flocks. Everybody just pitched in and said, we can make this happen and we'll just bumble our way through it until we get it right.
We did it. We knew at that point that it was real, that it was going to be what we thought it would be. What we didn't know is that it was going to turn out to be a lot better than we expected it to be.
I think, to be honest, that's what keeps me coming back to theater. That strong, family-oriented community feel like you're really a part of something that makes you feel okay about yourself in this crazy world. So I think it's a place where I fit in. I love being here. I have a great passion for it and can only see the incredible potential that the Empress Theater has yet to bring to this community and to the state of Utah, if not beyond in the near future.
The Welcomonts had done more than just finish Leo's work. They did more than just open up a theater. They revitalized a part of their town, a part of their street, a part of their culture, a part of their history that had been closed for 50 years. The Empress was home again.